Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to yet another Lean In. I'm Michael Linky here today at the Institute of Architects in Prefab, Melbourne. Great to have you with me again. In today's session, we hear from Damien Crough. Damien is the founding director and board chair of PrefabAU, the peak industry body for offsite construction in Australia. And Damien's going to be sharing his extensive experience in modular construction. I'm really pleased to say that we can't do these lean-ins without the really fantastic support of our partners. And this session today is supported by our principal partner here at the Institute of Architects, obviously BlueScope Steel, and we thank BlueScope Steel for bringing Damien to us today. Let's talk a little bit about Damien before I get to have a chat with him. In 2007, Damien began working with the renowned Australian architect Nonda Katsalidis and Hickory Group, and they developed and brought to market the prefabricated Unitised building system. And Damien's skill and his knowledge and experience with that system were used to grow and develop this business in Australia, where he was really the driving force behind new products and new projects in his role as Hickory's business development manager. The growth of that modular bathroom business really was an incredible coup for them, and that was awarded the Large Manufacturer of the Year award by the Victorian Government back in 2015. But in 2014, Damien then established Advanced Offsite Group, which is a specialised consultancy that enables clients to improve and enter new markets with existing offsite technologies. Damien also works with clients that are new to the offsite industry, and he identifies opportunities for the use of offsite supply chains and effectively incorporates these elements into the design, procurement, and also the project execution phases of many of the construction projects he looks after. In 2018, Damien changed and moved to join Schiavello, the well-known construction firm, to grow and develop their modular bathroom pod business. And with a current research project with the University of Melbourne, Schiavello bathroom pods are being designed in student accommodation, into healthcare, into residential projects as well. So we're really pleased to have Damien with us. Don't forget that this session is being recorded, so there will be a session recorded for you to view afterwards. If you miss any part of it or have to leave early, that's totally fine. And don't forget also that the chat box is here as well. It's your friend. Any questions for Damien, feel free to pop them in there. I'll go through those with Damien at the end of the session. So, Damien Crough, welcome to today's session. How are you?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, thank you. I'm very well. I'm about an hour and a half out of COVID-ridden Melbourne in Heathcote, Victoria.
Lucky you.
And we're kids are on school holidays, so we've got potentially 4 kids, 2 dogs and 2 lambs floating around somewhere that could make an appearance at any time. So be prepared. But yeah, it's lovely up here, and it's great to be part of your lean-in sessions, and appreciate the opportunity to participate and speak to your members. So I guess I'll get into the presentation now, and this is really just a bit of an overview of the work that I've been doing for probably the last 13 years, from developing modular building systems with Nonda Katsalidis and Hickory Group, to now with Schiavello, looking at modular bathrooms, exploring ways to improve those through better manufacturing techniques and processes and platforms and digitization, and then through to new building systems for medium to high rise. So this journey started for me in 2007 with Nonda Katsalidis. We looked at how we could take apartment buildings and build them in a factory because of the issues that were happening on site and continue to happen on site with weather delays, quality, and all other sorts of challenges that do make building projects very, very challenging at times. So what we did is we basically took buildings and broke them into components that could be manufactured in a factory, and to do that was extremely new to the industry. And I put up on the screen here the first project that was undertaken in Melbourne. And what we did was we took people from the automotive industry, because all the automotive manufacturers had started to shut down, and there was a great deal of knowledge and expertise that was coming out of that industry, and we started to apply that to the construction industry, and we saw some significant benefits in that. And this particular project if you look at it, it's effectively an oversized container, really. It's a structural box with a fit out inside and a facade on the outside. Now, these were manufactured in Melbourne in a little factory in Brooklyn. Not a little factory, really, a big factory. I think at one point we had about 6 factories covering about 30 or 40,000 square metres. And these boxes were effectively welded together with a structural column externally, and then which was a stackable element. So they were connected via bolting on site, and then we were able to install all the facade, all the internal fit out on the modules, and then lift them into position. Now, this was a very, very challenging site. It was on top of an existing open air car park. That car park had been there since 1950s. Underneath that was a substation which powers about 20% of Melbourne CBD. It's about 20 metres deep, full of oil-filled transformers, and it was a very challenging site because we couldn't do any heavy demolition. We couldn't use any sort of equipment that would disturb and cause the equipment to fail or to stop. So what we did here is we located the internal steel columns. We very delicately saw cut, found the top of those steel columns, welded on some starter bars, formed up some new columns, which you can see at the lower front there. And that was then taken up to a transfer deck, which is that, I guess, that white banding around the bottom of the building there at the top of the columns. And then from that point on, the modules were basically just stacked on top of each other. So this was the Unitised building technology. It was developed and brought to market in Melbourne. We did about 16 projects, and I'll take you through some of those projects, or most of those projects, with some imagery of what they looked like. I think most architects are probably aware of Unitised building and what has been done, but I will go through this because the modular building, it is really still an emerging technology in a growth sector, and really the only way that we were able to do this was through the development of digital technologies, and as they continue to progress, we're seeing a lot more opportunity in the market with modular and prefab technologies. So this building was effectively 9 stories. It was erected in 20 working days, so it was very quick. I actually purchased an apartment and lived there for about 3 years. I was on the third one up on this the closest end here, and it was a fantastic building. So the next project we did was another residential apartment building out in Chimin, Victoria. This was 50 apartments. Again, this was a partnership with Hickory Group. Nonda and I found the site, we purchased the site. We amalgamated a couple of sites together to get a large project. I think overall it was about 3,500 square metre site. It was a sort of a semi-basement with 4 levels of apartments on top. These modules were all installed over a very short period of time, again within a few weeks, and then some external cladding to finish off, and some internal services, risers, completion, etc., to tidy the building up. But again, a very, very quick build, and something which actually changed the landscape of that area of Melbourne. That was in what they call the Mega Mile precinct, where on the other side of your road you had the JB Hi-Fis and the big stores, where on the side of the road here it was only 1 level and sometimes up to 2 levels. They rewrote the structure plan then for that part of White Horse Road to allow 4-level development. It was very challenging. We got the building through, but it took a hell of a lot of hard work convincing councils. We had 73 objectors to the proposal, to the project, and a lot of them came from suburbs a long way away, Box Hill and Blackburn and places like that. And I think it was just the NIMBY approach from the locals that probably drove that. The next project we did was another very challenging project. This was one for state government. This was part of the NRAS scheme, National Rental Affordability Scheme in Coburg. It was a conventionally designed building, whereas the two previous projects, because they were our own, we had specifically designed them as modular buildings to be delivered with a system that we had developed. This was basically taking an already designed conventional building and turning that into a modular approach. So square peg in a round hole, if I can use that analogy. And it was challenging. And we learned a lot from this project, but it was a good result. And at the end of the day, they had to deliver. They had a sunset clause to deliver to get the NRADs. So the only way they could do that was with a modular build. So the project was delivered in just under 12 months from start to finish. Another project that we undertook was just for a private developer client in Melbourne, in Preston. Again, this was another challenging project where it was already designed. The client wanted to get this thing done quickly. So we converted a conventional design into a modular building design and delivered that project in Preston. Again, it's something that was designed as a conventional building and therefore wasn't driven by a modular limitation. However, there are limitations to modular, and I'll go into that a little bit later. This was one of our own development projects in Richmond. It's an interesting one. Again, pretty challenging. It was in a tight little street off Bridge Road in Richmond, so access to the site was difficult. There was a 3-level basement, so it took about 6 months to go down and then come back again to the transfer level where you can see that the text relief in that transfer slab there. From that point up, it was an 11-day install for all the modules. Again, this one was designed specifically for a modular outcome. However, the architecture, it's difficult to pick up that this was a fully prefabricated structure from the transfer deck upwards. This is probably one of my favourite projects. I put a lot of time and effort into getting this one to reality. I think the driver here was we had a developer who was really committed to a modular approach for his project. He was a real estate agent, had been in the game for a very long time, had this site, which was a very tight site. It was about 290 square metres footprint. There's a tiny little laneway up the side and around the back, and it's in a very busy shopping precinct in Moonee Ponds. Now, what we did here was to get this through, we went, I think, 3 head contract builders. We worked with to eventually find a builder that understood how to put together a project like this and understood the costing of a project like this. So it took us about 2 years, but we eventually got there with the right building partner. We were just supplying the modular element of this, even though it was with Hickory. It was too small of a project for them to deliver as a head contract, just to the nature of the overheads and prelims and that type of thing. So we subcontracted that to a smaller building company. This building went up in 4.5 days. What we did is we approached the council and said, look, we can build this conventionally, and we're going to disrupt everybody for a very long time. And invariably what happens in these instances where you do have a building project in a very busy shopping precinct is that the surrounding retailers can often have challenges and sometimes go out of business due to hoardings and people not being able to access their shops or retail outlets. So what we did is we just said, look, we'll close the street down for a few days. We'll bring in a few cranes and we'll erect the building very quickly, and that's exactly what happened. So 4.5 days from the transfer slab and the core being erected. And sorry, that is a lamb. That not you can hear. There's 2 lambs floating around somewhere eating all of the plants and flowers, but they do make a bit of a racket sometimes. So this was very quick, 4.5 days. For me, I mean, architecture I think is quite interesting too, and shows what can be done with a volumetric modular system. And just to sort of elaborate a little bit on that, the terminology volumetric modular refers to a full volume, basically a fully finished box. There are other types of modular flat pack, kitted parts, and hybrids. So, this is what we call a volumetric approach. Another interesting project we got involved in, we were engaged to build a project, a hotel, 250-room hotel for a developer in the northwest of Australia for the mining boom. So the hotel itself was going to Port Hedland in Western Australia. We manufactured all of the hotel rooms into these modules with the facades on them. We sent them to the port to put them onto a ship, and just as they were about to be loaded onto the ship, the client actually fell over, and we were left with effectively a 250-room hotel sitting on the shelf, which is not a great place to be. But luckily, because it was modular, what we were able to do was actually break that hotel into two parts, and half of that hotel went to Bendigo, up near the hospital there, to deliver the new Art Series Hotel, which is the Schiavello studio, and the other half went to Darwin to create the extension to the Ridges Hotel up there. So we ended up finding a home for the hotel, and it just goes to show that the flexibility of modular can also provide some significant outcomes in instances like this. And that was the only time that it happened, and hopefully wouldn't happen again. Some smaller projects we did, it was a terminal substation power core up in near Ballarat. So this was just I think about 4 or 5 modules fitted out with all the electrical and cabling components, etc. The Stellar Apartments in WA, this was a really interesting one. It's where the WA government, the WA Housing, actually became developer, and they partnered with a local builder and to deliver some affordable housing in Western Australia. And this project was built all in Melbourne, delivered by ship around to Western Australia, and installed in 11 days. The project, there's quite a bit of information about this project through Curtin University. They did quite a bit of research around the benefits, time, costs, etc. And it was a really good outcome, I believe, and architecturally also quite an interesting building. Another project that was completed in Melbourne in the factory and then delivered to South Headland in WA, way up north west of Australia. Again, this was a collaboration. Fender Katsalidis did the facade detailing. The manufacturing was done in Melbourne and delivered to WA for a private developer, again to deal with accommodation shortfall when the mining boom was on. This was a little project we did for a school in WA. Duffy Primary. Now, this is quite interesting, and this was actually the driver behind Prefab Australia. I was involved with the University of Melbourne through a few connections there, and we were invited through our modular business to participate in the final round of the Future Proofing Schools ARC research grant. And I got invited to an event there, and I was sitting in a room with a whole bunch of architects who'd been asked to come up with a design for the future of schools, and they weren't specifically asked to provide a modular response or a prefab response, but majority of those architects did provide a prefab response to what the future of schools will look like. And I think that probably really stems from the fact that most of us actually went to school in portable classrooms or transportables or whatever terminology was used. And I guess the thing was that they were very ugly buildings, they were poorly performing buildings, and probably has a lot to do with a lot of the negativity that did, or stigma around prefabrication. And so it was interesting to me that when I was invited there and asked to participate, that there was a great deal of prefab responses to schools. At that meeting, I met a couple of gentlemen from NBRS Plus Partners, and they indicated to me that they were interested in working together, and that they had also, I think, won one of the awards for the Future Proofing Schools program with their Modular pod system, which was very much aligned to what we were doing with the Unitised building technology. So I showed the guys the factory. We had some conversations. We participated, I think, in some tendering, and then we were successful in winning the job. And we then produced this great little school addition in Canberra, and I think it was installed over a weekend, over about a 48-hour time frame. There was, I believe, about 520 square metres of learning area, which made up around 10 or 11 modules. But out of that, as I was saying before, out of that event, that Future Proofing Schools event, grew PrefabAU, because I was sitting in a room with other manufacturers who I didn't know existed, but we were all doing a similar thing on different scales and slightly different products. But we were all sitting in a room together, and I said, well, hey, why don't we all start working together? And from that, we started a steering committee, and from that steering committee, PrefabAU was established, and PrefabAU is now the peak body for prefab in Australia. And we have a few hundred members. We do an annual conference usually, except for this year because of COVID. So we're also doing webinars and online events. All right, I'll keep going. What I'm going to talk about now, that's a bit of background about what I was doing from sort of 2007 to 2014. And now specifically sort of with Schiavello and other work that I've done recently, looking at designing for flexibility. So I'm going to talk through sustainability benefits, a case study example that we have done in conjunction with BlueScope steel, using the TrueCore for our automated roll forming machines. And then also what are some of the other opportunities and things that are happening in the Australian market right now. So just working through some of the benefits of prefabrication, and I think most people are probably well aware of what the benefits are. But the main ones that we look at is the reuse and recyclability, and obviously that depends on the material usage. In this instance, we're talking about steel, the light gauge steel, particularly, and also the way we do that is through the digital platforms that we use and develop to deliver these projects. Sorry, I just got a little bit distracted. There's a lamb under this deck here poking around, making some noise. So what we've got currently running is what's called a CRC, a Cooperative Research Council project with the University of Melbourne. And what we're doing there is we are looking at the bathroom pods that Schiavello currently manufactures, and looking at how we can increase the performance of those, reduce cost, and look at also hybrid materials and systems, as well as digital platforms that help us minimize waste. And the way we do that is that we've developed a modeling program which allows us to take our client's design, the architect's design. So all we do is we take the drawings from the architect, we plug them into our digital platform, and we stretch and pull it into the shape and size of what they're after. We add the materials that they've specified, the tap, the base and the tile, etc. And then what we're able to do is to spit that out into a bill of materials, a manufacturing process, and with all of the quality inspections. And then we can also track every pod from the first stages of manufacture all the way through to completion in the factory and then delivery to site. So this is very important for us as a control platform. We recently were in a situation where we had 4 projects running concurrently in the factory. So the coordination is extremely challenging in those instances. And this is something that we've developed to help us do that. So what we do is we start with our base frame. We have an automated welding cell. So it's a robotic cell. We feed in the steel components. 22 minutes later, it spits out a base structure. That base structure then, in parallel, we're feeding the BlueScope TrueCore steel into the Scottsdale framing machine. That's roll forming the frames at the same time as the automated welding cell is welding the base structure. And in about 45 minutes or so, we've got all of the elements we need to put a structure together, which is that top line there. So that's about a 45-minute process. then what we do through the modelling, we're able to determine exactly how many tiles we need. So the bill of materials, so we can procure all the components and parts. It tells us whether we need to cut, substrates or linings such as FC sheet material. It will give us a cut list if we're using pre-finished materials such as compact laminate or any of those sort of materials. It'll also give us a cut list for the tiles if we have tile cuts, and then will allow us to maximise the use of those tiles to minimise the wastage on those materials. So that's really important for us. Then what we're also able to do is we're able to automate the plumbing and electrical and all of the other components that make up the bathroom pod. So it's quite an interesting and really valuable tool that we use, and the digital technologies have come a long way, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. So what we can do is through our model, and you can see on the right side there's sort of a cut through section which shows all the true core steel flat framing that's used for our walls and hobs and ceilings, etc. And one of the critical things for us is to make sure that we get the spacings correct that allow all of the fixtures and fittings, things like the taps and the lugged elbows for the piping, hot and cold water. We need to get that all right and get that on the model. And that means then that once we press go on the Scottsdale machine or on the automated welding cells, there's no other work that needs to be done. There's no cutting, there's no changing. So for us, what we can do is through the digital platform, it will place in there all of the backing supports, it will give dimensions, and then we can output that to get those components cut and ready for assembly. So it just means that the waste is minimal. There's really nothing left once a pod is put together, and I'll show you soon what's left over from the bathroom pod once it leaves the factory. So all of the automation comes, as I said, identifying where the light switches are, where the plumbing runs go, and what that means is it coordinates with their Scottsdale framing machine. So when the true core steel gets fed in, it punches, cuts holes, and does all the things we need it to do to accommodate the services that are placed within the bathroom. These services are installed by a qualified plumber, and they'll often do a review prior to manufacture, and then we can make some minor changes. But the idea is that we minimise the amount of material required, we minimise the amount of piping, so we get the most effective runs to the fixtures, and then we also try and eliminate dead legs and things like that with hot water. So there's not a lag or a longer duration for hot water to start coming out of the fixtures. So again, you can see here from the model, there's on the left-hand side is the true core framing and the penetrations, and it shows exactly how the pipes are run. So what we can do is a takeoff then of the length of pipe, how many elbows, how many T-sections, etc. And then when we're ordering from the bill of materials, we can be very precise. So we don't order too much. And again, because waste is very important, waste is cost, and we want to minimise that as much as possible. Some of the other things that we can do in the modelling is, again, like I said, we look at the substrates. We can move the doors and the opening locations, and that will then automatically update shop drawings of those components. And so every element is modelled. Every element has a value, and those elements and values can be changed very quickly and easily. So from a client issuing us with a set of their architect's drawings, their design, we can very quickly return a design set of shop drawings for the architect and the client to review and approve with a detailed costing for every element. Again, just looking through the process of the modelling, grouping all the fixtures, hot and cold water and sanitary, routing, adjusting frames and locations of voids and openings and things like that, and then running clash detection, which is always key to services within buildings, is having that clash detection tool, which ensures once we're on the production line, there's no need for any cutting or moving things, because we can fully excuse me, we can fully review and model and walk through that before we make any parts. So here on the left-hand side is a bathroom pod that has been removed from the production line. You'll see there's some plastic wrapping, there's a few little offcuts of pipe, and that's about all that's left over, because they're so precise, the amount of materials that we need and that we order and that we use are modelled, and that's the significant benefit, is that minimal waste for the production line. Reuse, again, you know, the materials we use, we select them based on the reuse. On the left-hand side, you can see there's stacks of true core steel. So we just feed them into the Scottsdale machine. That rolls and folds and punches the wall framing and ceiling framing. And in that little bin there on the left-hand side is the waste that's left over. So that's just, you know, steel that's sent back and recycled at the end of the day. So it's very, very minimal waste. So I'm going to just talk through a case study example, urban and student accommodation project that we completed. Now this was really important for us, because prior to us using roll form frames, using that true core steel, we were using fully welded tube frames, and they were very strong, but it was quite costly and time consuming to fabricate and hand weld fully the structure. So once we changed to using true core steel with Scottsdale framing, the frames are all screwed together and punches out very quickly. So here's an example of a project, the very first project that we did using that system. It was a project by Icon in Swanson Street. It was an existing, there's a bit of a heritage building on the corner there, a little white building you can see. And our production rate to achieve the 423 bathroom pods delivered to site within the builder's program meant that we had to produce 10 pods per day. And the only way that we could do that was to move to using a roll-formed true core steel frame. Some of the other benefits of doing this was that we could develop these sub-assemblies. So this is sort of taken from the automotive industry. What we do is we'll roll form the frame. We'll then put the cladding, in this instance, the student bathroom pod. So they're quite a basic product. They have pre-finished linings internally. So this one has a Polytech compact laminate, a 5mm product. And we apply that. We apply and install the access panels, all of the wiring, even the plumbing. It's all installed at ground level or at safe working level. And then the whole element is lifted up and placed on top of the walls. So this speeds up the process and also allows us to provide a much better quality product. So here's the production line. And this is the way we were doing them to achieve the 10 per day. It's getting quite cold here. I'm just going to zip up a little bit. We had the bathrooms on wheels, and each day they would progress from one station to another, and then out the door with the target of 10 pods per day, which was able to be achieved. Lifting and transportation, pretty simple. We just have some steel sections that sleeve into the base structure. You can see the eyelets then, they're picked up by the crane and just dropped into a loading deck where they're wheeled off and placed into position on site. Sometimes they're into set down, sometimes they're just onto PT slabs. These were directly onto the post tension steel slab, concrete slabs without any set downs. Another project that we undertook and delivered was a retirement apartments in Wollongong. There is a link there. I won't click on that now, but there's a link there to the project and a little YouTube video which walks through the room, so you can have a look at that. Again, we had a production of 10 a day. Challenging project, interstate, but the project ended up as really successful. The bathrooms were quite large. And also were designed to have future-proofing elements in there because it was a retirement product or retirement apartments. We put in extra supports and things so that handrails and grab rails, etc., can be added at a later date for the residents when required. Another project we undertook was the Park Royal Parramatta extension. We did 91 bathrooms in the Premier Suites, which involve very large bathrooms with large bathrooms with bathtubs and the like, and quite challenging. We developed linear strip drain grate systems for these, which have now been watermarked, so that's a proprietary product. But these were delivered as you see them there, apart from the towels and the sanitary products delivered from Melbourne to Parramatta and installed quite successfully. So what are the opportunities in Australia? Bathroom pods, obviously that's it's a maturing market, I would say. There's multiple manufacturers in the country. Sync, the Hickory product, there's Interpod, there's us, there's several others. Skypod Systems, you've got Pacific Platinum. So it's quite a mature market, and predominantly being used extensively in student accommodation, starting to see a big inroads into healthcare, aged care, still some work in residential. Mirvac have done about 3,000 bathroom pods in their projects over the last 5 years. So, bathroom pods are pretty well established and it's a growing market. But what are the other opportunities? So I think high-rise structures, there's a really good opportunity here, and Schiavello has been working with some engineers on what we call SPEC, which is single pin expansion clamp. So that is a post-tension steel column for very quick erection of buildings, and I'll talk a little bit through that. On your screen there is the basic idea behind the post-tension column, but the reason this was developed, it was looking at a very specific market, and that market is lightweight structures on top of existing structures. And what drove this project initially was the old David Jones building in Sydney, in the city there. I think that's about a 10-storey heritage structure, and they are putting 22 plus stories of apartments on top of that, and wanted to come up with a solution that would deliver that structure cost effectively, quickly, and very lightweight, so there was minimal strengthening or works required to the existing heritage structure. So that's what drove this system. It's a post-tension column. Basically, a male to female connection. It's bolted from the top. And that's it. The column is done. And what we've done is we've married this together with true core steel frames to then be able to add other elements and develop it into a panelised system. So we can lift the whole panel, which includes the column as the support, a beam, infill light gauge steel, and then any sort of external cladding or glazing and facades. So this is something that's in development. It's being tested. We actually have built a small example of it in the Schiavello factory in Tullamarine in Melbourne, and there's some images here of it going together. You can see the panel with the true core steel framing in between, and then beams on top. So it's lifted up. There's the male connection protruding from the bottom of the column, which then just sleeves into the female stub column as a starting point. And you can see on the right there, the workers are tightening that bolt, and that's it. That's your structure done. So there's no propping required. So it's quite interesting because on a conventional concrete structure, to start fit out, if you typically need to be 4-5 levels in structure above, due to shoring and reshoring, propping, repropping, etc. But whereas this, as soon as you put the floor on above, and in this instance we've used a CLT floor, we feel that CLT works really well as floors in buildings. So this is what we call a hybrid system. Once you're up on that first level above, you can get straight in there and start fitting it out. So we started looking at some real projects to apply this to, so here you can go. Here you can see the CLT panels being lifted in for the floors. This was all installed in a matter of an hour or so, and this was the first time that it had ever been erected. So it came together extremely quickly. So then we looked at projects we could apply this to through some connections with Cbus. We looked at a 185 Wharf Street project concept. So it was designed as a residential building. We looked at taking that building, which on the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side, we developed a spec concept. So we took the existing design, architecture, structure, and then just changed it to be delivered in a hybrid manner. And there was no change to the look of the building. We were able to maintain the architecture, and it was quite an interesting exercise. And then we looked at how this thing would actually be put together. We looked at, the programming and sequencing of structures on site. So if you have a look at how we do it, you've seen the panels there. We basically lift those panels in. Now they may have cladding or internal linings, or they could have services in them as well, depending on the project. So by tower crane, we lift those in. And then we've got a smaller spider crane. If you look at stage 2 there's a little spider crane in there lifting in CLT panels. And we still have a concrete core and some shear walls. And we're just sort of complementing that. But effectively, the panels are lifted in very quickly. Floors go in very quickly, which means the fit out can happen straight away. So for comparing this to a conventional type building approach, for the jumping each level, so doing structure, we also included wet areas, so we would slip in some prefabricated bathroom pods and then put the facade on, and we were looking about a 3-day jump cycle compared to about 5, 6, 7 days on conventional structures, depending on the design. So there was significant benefit. We were also invited into the Bligh Street project in Sydney, which we supported an architect for. That wasn't successful, but we came up with a 35-storey concept on top of 15 levels of conventional structure. So really, really flexible. And also, as I said, it's designed specifically for existing buildings or on existing structures to add lightweight to. Okay, so what else? What other opportunities? The corrections industry is really quite busy at the moment. So we've been involved in developing stackable modular cells. This was something we did sort of in conjunction with New South Wales Government. The project didn't get up for us, but it was a good exercise and good experience. And we believe there will be more call for this in the future. And I think that's about all I have. Hopefully I haven't gone over time, and it's been informative, and thank you very much for everybody for listening. And hopefully I can do something again soon.
Thank you, Damien. Good to hear from you. I have to say, we've had a huge amount of questions come in on the chat, so you've been incredibly popular. The first question I had was, how much is that lamb a kilo? But we will forgive those questions.
Unfortunately, they're pets now, so that's not going to happen.
Oh, dear.
Very sadly.
No worries. All good. But thanks very much for your presentation. I know it's cold outside. We won't keep you for too much longer, but if you can bear with me for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if that's all right. We have a number of questions to go.
Yeah, happy to.
In terms of, this is a great question from Larry, and he says, in terms of the size of the prefab housing industry as a dollar value or as a percentage of the overall construction sector, what does prefab make up? Have you got any idea about the size and scope of that? This is a growing sector.
From the research that PrefabAU has done, we believe the size of the market in Australia is about 3% of the overall industry. So if you compare that to the US, where it's around 10 to 15%, or places like Europe, Scandinavia, where it's up to 50, 60, 70% of the market size, then we are in our infancy, and it is an emerging market. It is a growth sector. It has been identified specifically by the Victorian Government as a growth sector. But yeah, look, it's a small percentage right now, and I think the challenge there is education and also advocacy around the industry and what can be done. But I mean, I think architects are key to that as well, because if if architects start designing around modular and get a really good understanding of how to do that. And modular is not just a volume; it can be panelized, kit parts, hybrid. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but I think architects are key to really helping grow the industry.
In terms of the modular pods, in terms of I suppose requirements for airtightness, water protection, I mean standard sort of, they're not going to leak as soon as they get on the back of a truck.
Yeah, good question. No, look, typically, and I mean, look, it varies manufacturer to manufacturer, and obviously you need to have the right quality checks in place in production. But typically, building in a factory is far superior in quality and performance to building on site. You're in a controlled environment. It's much easier to coordinate. We know who's doing what at what time, and that's part of the reason why specifically Schiavello developed their own tracking platform for the production line, is because the quality and performance in the buildings is extremely important.
They're beautiful looking. I mean, these modular designs are fantastic, and they've come a long way since the early days. What about restrictions of materials? Is there anything that you can't put in them that will prohibit the completion of a project?
Look, no, I don't think so. I mean, I haven't really come across a situation where we couldn't put any specific materials. I mean, a lot of the time, if you're talking about a volumetric type approach, which I showed quite a bit of, your restraints there are typically your transportation and logistics. So how do you get it there and how do you get it in position? So what can you stick on the back of a truck and get to site? And can you actually get it on the site? Is there a relevant crane or access and those? They're typically the biggest challenges are logistics, and that's what you need to work through up front. And I think that's probably the key message with prefab and modular is it's all up front. So all of the design, everything has to be resolved up front, because once you go into manufacture, you don't have the opportunity to revisit things if you've gotten it wrong. So that's always a really important message.
Interestingly enough, the logistics really have the questions related to the logistics and the transportation have come through quite heavily on this call. A question from Ellen, and she talks about an example. So she said, look, can you talk to the transport costs in regards to, say, regional and remote locations? And she's picked South Headland, in terms of transporting, is a barge or a boat transport critical? Is delivery by road comparable? And in terms of local trades, you use local tradies to complete the project on site in terms of development, or do you bring your own people in from Schiavello?
Yeah, look, in the past, in the work that I've done where we delivered, modular buildings from Melbourne to Port Hedland, for example, it was by ship. And we found that was the most cost-effective way, because what happens is the ships, once they get to Melbourne, they either go back to China via Western Australia, or they go up the other way and they're empty. So, it's quite a cheap transportation mode to get product over there. So we always found that was the best way. And the trades, I mean, look, it's challenging getting trades in those areas, especially at the point in time that we were doing projects up there with the mining boom. All of the trades were really, really hard to secure. So being that, probably 85% or 90% of the building came on a ship from Melbourne helped a lot. And we did send a lot of our trades, finishing trades and finishing people up there to manage some local trades, and that was the best way to complete the project.
Brenton Rashid, he runs Red Shed Architects, and he's raised a really good point. He says in the chat, he found difficulty with projects overcoming the pricing comparison compared to conventional construction. And so his question to you, Damien, is can you, I suppose, sort of give us your thoughts on how you found partnerships with building companies who might be sort of somewhat, they might have a level of trepidation in going down this route. They might have, they might be unfamiliar with the process. Do you have any feelings about the take-up with established building companies for this process? Is it growing?
Yeah, look, I think it is growing, and I gave that example of the Hall Street project in Moonee Ponds, where it took the developer I think three head contractors to get it right, to meet the budget, to understand the process. So I think it's really an education piece, and that's something that which PrefabAU, tries to focus on, around educating the industry. But you need the right people. You need them to understand the process, because if a head contractor builder doesn't really understand, they'll just add cost because of the risk factor. So that, and invariably that's what happens, and then a lot of projects don't get up because of that. But when you've got a developer who's committed to it, like we did on Hall Street, and I worked very hard for 2 years with 3 different builders, but we got there in the end. So I think persistence is probably the message there. But also, I guess there are builders out there who have done this. So maybe also don't reinvent the wheel. If there's a builder that's done this, who's delivered modular projects or prefab projects, go and speak to them first. And then they've got the knowledge and the expertise.
Yeah, true. Michael, who's on the call, not me, another Michael, he says, thanks very much for the very informative session that you've done, Damien. He says he's just built 2 schools using modular systems, and they're fantastic. So there you go. You've got an ambassador and an evangelist working on your behalf there. Now, let's
Victorian Government and has been very, very good in respect of, and New South Wales now too, in the modular school building program. So there's been a lot of procurement through government for modular schools, and it's really helped the industry a lot. So that's excellent.
Great stuff. Oh, well done. In terms of, just following on from Brenton's question in relation to cost, Wally has come through with a question, and he said, look, is there a general rule of thumb when it comes to economy of scale? For example, how many modules are required for it to be more cost effective than, say, a traditional construction process?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely. For an example, with the bathroom pod business that we have at Schiavello, I think the smallest project we've done is 100 bathrooms. So there's definitely economies of scale. Absolutely, we're talking about manufacturing. So I mean, it will vary project to project. It's it comes down to what are the design costs that need to be amortized, or the setup costs, or what components need to be fabricated, fixtures, etc., to produce the parts and pieces. So if you can amortize that over a greater volume, then there'll be significant cost benefit to the project.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, look, if you're looking for cost benefits, then the bigger the bigger the project and the more repetition, then that's where you're going to see the benefit.
In terms of, we've talked about components, and now I really want to talk about certification, and this is a question that came in on the chat, and the question asks, how do you manage to get certification on certain fire rated and acoustic requirements? Because Ahmad, who's asked this question, he says, look, I assume that all party walls in the multi-res modular job aren't, sort of standard in the CSR or the Boral book. So how do you manage to get certification across the line in some of these builds?
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, where you can, you obviously would use a CSR detail, wall detail, intertenancy, etc. But in many cases, it will be a fire engineered solution. And a lot of the time, what we found, specifically in some of the volumetric modular apartment buildings and those types of projects, was that just to fully sprinkle the building was a really simple solution, and actually quite cost effective. Yeah, look, it's usually a fire engineered solution in that respect, fully sprinkled, and it doesn't add significant costs. We found it was quite cost effective to do that, rather than try and design our own systems and come up with all different types of materials and layers and layers of fire-rated plasterboard and the like. So that was the approach that we managed to get approval for.
The questions are coming through thick and fast, and I will apologise in advance. If I don't get to your question, then by all means, I'm going to harass Damien at the end for his email address, and maybe we can communicate there through PrefabAU, or get you back in for maybe round 2. Who knows? Let's talk about finance as well. A question from Andrew on the chat. He talks about the issues with getting finance in terms of bank financing, which actually is quite challenging. They're very reluctant to fund anything that is developed offsite. They're very traditional in their outlook. What's your experience of this? And from a PrefabAU perspective, is there any sort of advocacy work you could do to showcase the benefit to lenders about the benefits of actually building offsite?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you're talking about residential homes, he's right. There's not a bank that has a product specifically for building a modular home, and that is challenging. And I believe that there are banks, for example, in I think Westpac in New Zealand have come up with a product. So they're starting to look into it. Nothing yet in Australia. I know that the discussions are happening, and at PrefabAU, at board level, it's a large part of the discussion that we have around doing a series with the banking sector and those institutions around listening to the industry and to our members, and then advocating on behalf of them to develop a product. So the more people we get that say, hey, there's not a product here, and if we had a product like this, we could do more, we could grow the industry, etc., then I think that's a positive thing. So for that market, yes, that is challenging. In respect of the manufacturers for larger sort of commercial projects, typically they'll have a working line of credit with the bank, so it would be done a different way. So more of a facility, like an overhead facility, to allow them to procure materials and cover the cost of that work until the product does hit site. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's one of the big challenges is that the banks don't like paying for stuff until it turns up on site.
Absolutely.
There are other mechanisms such as the PPSR, where you can register, the bank can register a mortgage over that until it does get to site. So there are different mechanisms in place, but look, that's one of the areas that PrefabAU is working on. Absolutely.
In terms of advocacy, let's stay on this channel, right? So Ken has asked a really good question on the chat, and he talks about the recommendation for government agencies to be more consistent to support investment in the modular sector. I mean, it is a growing sector. It's architecturally robust. It's fantastic for major builds, and we've seen it obviously in the residential space in multi-res. Do you have any sort of plans or recommendation for how we as architects should engage with government to help support investment and further in capital in the modular sector?
Look, I think for the approach that I've always had, and also one of the drivers behind PrefabAU was just showcasing, just show them these bloody great buildings that architects are designing and that the industry is delivering, and hopefully I've been able to show a bit of that today in my presentation. But I think the more we can educate them and just show them what's being done, then I think they'll get more comfortable with saying or changing policy. But look, there is a real commitment already within Victoria and New South Wales government. I think South Australian government are also starting to get there, with particularly with the schools programs, and not just for temporary, but for permanent modular schools. That's a big thing. So really happy with that progress. But then it is starting to happen in other sectors as well. And we just need to see more of it. So the more projects that get delivered, the more that architects are able to engage with manufacturers, work together collaboratively, and deliver the projects, then I think that will be the key to the success and the growth.
In terms of, I mean, you've worked for a long time in the modular sector. Surely things have gone wrong, and one of the questions on the chat is, tell us about a time when something hasn't quite worked the way it should have.
Oh, God. Where do we start? Yeah, look, there's always challenge. Every building project has challenges. That it is not easy. It is not easy. One specific one, oh goodness me. Well, I guess, look, if I give the example of the hotel that was going to go to Port Hedland, and it was sitting on the port ready to be loaded on the ship, and then the client fell over, and we got left with a modular hotel, a 250 room modular hotel. I mean, that's a really challenging situation, and the costs in holding that, and then finding two projects to then split it in half and deliver it to. But we got there in the end. It took us about 18 months, I think, at the time to turn that around into two separate projects. But it was something that couldn't be done with a conventional building. If a developer had fallen over halfway through a conventional build, it's an absolute shit fight to get that building finished, and so I think that was probably a very good outcome considering what had happened. And we're just fortunate, obviously, with the size of the business at the time with the Hickory group there, that they had the the financial, I guess, capacity to cover that for the meantime until we did find a home. But look, every project's challenging. On-site things happen that you just can never really foresee. So I think planning is everything to these sorts of projects. Yeah.
It's interesting talking to architects prior to this presentation to get a bit more of a sense of an idea about modular construction. There are some that really have seen, they're quite dismissive of it, and it's only a small group, but people that have said, well, this has failed to take off previously. We've been around the profession for a long time. We've seen architects adopt this and it's fallen by the wayside. And there's been a long history of attempts at modular and prefab work previously. We've seen Le Corbusier, Buckminster, etc. And what's changed? Is it just technology, robotics? What is it that has really
I think
lifted it?
Yeah. Michael, I'd say it's the digital technology. The development of that is come a long way very quickly. I mean, even back in 2010, when we were building with Hickory all of these unitised building projects, we were using, we're modelling everything, absolutely everything, because it was absolutely critical to do that. But now with some of the other technologies, we're with our research project with the University of Melbourne. We're using Revit with Rhino and Grasshopper, and then we've got plugins that, for example, for our Scottsdale framing machine with the TrueCore steel, when we draw our frames, which is, it's off a parametric model, so we stretch and pull, it takes it to the shape of the architect's design. We hit send and it goes straight to the Scottsdale framing machine and starts making those parts. So, and these are just add-ons that, it's a $2,000 or $3,000 add-on to the Revit system, etc. So these sort of technologies now, and the fact that we can model, we can walk through, we can do the VR, AR, all of that stuff. I mean, that's making significant headway now into construction. I was involved in a project a few years ago where the builder actually did a full VR, AR design, so everything had to be fully modeled. And what that meant was that the benefit there was that the building certifier could walk through the building before anything was even built. Not a single bit of dirt had been turned and nothing had been made. They could walk through that building as it was designed and identify the issues there and then. And I think that's where the industry needs to go, is using these digital tools in a manner that can eliminate the errors and cost overruns and things on site, which invariably happens when you can't foresee these sorts of things happening. For sure.
I acknowledge we're a little bit over time. This always happens when we have a fascinating subject like this, but I do want to say a huge thank you to you, Damien. Just a fantastic representation of modular construction solutions. It's something different than so that we get exposed to on a daily basis. This is a great opportunity for us to explore the different opportunities and the emerging trends which are coming out, especially in that multi-res environment as well. So Damien Crough, a huge thank you. And I will say, just in parting, in terms of, because I'm conscious that we didn't get to everybody's questions, and I apologise for that. We had a lot of interest and a lot of Q&A. Best way for people to get more information, go to PrefabAU, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to prefabaus.org. And we've also got some webinars coming up. Send us an email if there's something in particular you want to know about or learn about. We'll put something together. So there's a new membership structure that's just about to be implemented as well. And we are still aiming for a national conference again around about this time next year. Like everybody's probably hoping to do, and missing that face-to-face interaction and, sitting around and having a beer or a glass of wine and having a chat. So, we look forward to that as well. But thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of it. And hopefully everybody's gotten something out of it today, and hope to speak to you all soon.
Great stuff. Thank you, Damien Crough from PrefabAU and, of course, Schiavello Construction. Great to have you with us today. So for those of you, yes, we are recording the session. So if you came late, don't forget that you can always go to our COVID-19 resource page as well. So by all means, have a look there for all of our lean-in recordings. And, of course, Damien's slides as well are up there. So don't stress if you didn't get to the entire presentation. That will be available and live later on this afternoon. That is it for today's Lean In. A huge thank you, as always, to BlueScope Steel, the Institute's principal partner. They sponsored today, and they were very kind to get Damien in and for us to have an hour with him. So a huge thank you to BlueScope Steel, of course. And that is it. Like I said, I've been Michael Linke here at the Institute of Architects with none of my colleagues present in the building, but I'll be back here again next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is going to be really fascinating. We had a session last week with Lindy Johnson. You remember that she was our business development guru, talking about how to establish a really strong pipeline of work. We had over 550 people register for that. And we couldn't fit everybody in the room. So next week, we're bringing in Ross Clark, who's a very well-respected and esteemed architect consulting gentleman who's just fantastic. And I've spent the last few days talking to him just in relation to how we can actually empower you all to make sure that your practices really thrive and succeed in this era of which we're facing. So don't forget, tune in 12 noon next Tuesday, and we'll see you then. Anyway, that's it from me. I've been Michael Linke here at the Institute of Architects. Great to have you with me, and look forward to catching up with you at another Lean In session next Tuesday. Until then, stay safe.